What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel. And yes, I am doing this video a week early because, well, I finally managed to narrow down my year-end list to a top 30. That's right, I'm only going to be doing 30 albums, and yeah, this was trying on the soul, because I will go ahead and say I thought this year was incredible for the most part when it came to albums. I mean, hell, I think I set a record for album reviews in one year. I can't even count. I think I did like maybe over 200 to 250 reviews, which, holy shit, what am I doing with my life sometimes? But I do it for the love of metal and for the love of all you, my subscribers and viewers alike. So, yeah, it's time to discuss what were the best albums, at least in my opinion, of 2024. Well, I'm doing a top 30 because I didn't want to go absolutely bonkers like I've done the last couple of years of doing these year-end lists. But I managed to narrow it down to 30. And ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty. Kicking things off at number 30, we have In Vain with Solomon. This was a surprise. I remember, actually, if I recall, I reviewed this on Under the Radar, and I was just blown away at the melodies and the songwriting. I mean, these guys are a Norwegian progressive, blackened, melodic death metal band. Basically, if you took bands like Opeth, In Mourning, bands along those lines, and just combine them, but add a little bit of a blackened feel at times. But yeah, this was just a beautiful album that came out back in the summertime that just completely caught me off guard. I still need to get my CD copy of it, but it's still phenomenal prog, nothing more, nothing less. Number 29, we have Saxon with Hellfire and Damnation. So yeah, this was the oldest album that came out this year that made my list. This came out all the way back at the beginning of the year in January, and it still made the cut because when it came to classic metal albums this year, there was only a couple that really kind of caught my eye and caught my attention this year, Saxon being one of them. And of course, Saxon just continued to show that they are still one of the most consistent metal bands of all time across the board. And I see this band, I don't see them slowing down anytime soon. And in fact, I can't wait to hear what comes next from these Nawabum legends. Number 28, we have Wolfheart with Draconian Darkness. Speaking of surprises that kind of came out of nowhere, this ended up being one of my personal favorite melodic death metal albums of the year, because this was my first time checking out Wolfheart, and of course they're from Finland, and they honestly perfectly mixed Finnish melodic death metal with the Gothenburg style of melodic death metal into something that didn't sound repetitive, and it actually had more energy, it had more emotional weight behind it. And of course the production, the performances from everybody really, really shined, and I just couldn't get over how just, again, the surprise, it just came out of nowhere for me into something that ended up making my top 30. So, Wolfheart, I definitely look forward to hearing more from these guys in the future. Number 27, we have Spectral Voice with Sparagmos. In terms of Death Doom, there wasn't really a whole lot. I mean, well, I guess I shouldn't say there wasn't a whole lot. There was quite a few great Death Doom albums, a couple that just barely missed the cut. The one that did make the cut was Spectral Voice because, you know, it's pretty much 3/4 of Blood Incantation, which, spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about them much more in depth later on. But this was like the year of members of Blood Incantation, because you had this album came out earlier in the year, and in terms of Death Doom, I would say this was the best Death Doom album of the year because it's just so murky and sinister and dark. These guys love disembowelment. Let's just put it at that. They love disembowelment and incantation, and just combine the two into something that just sounds cavernous, murky, and just ugh. So yeah, Spectral Voice at number 27. Number 26, we have Eternal with Cryptic Lust. This was a debut, and this debut really, really caught my eye because basically, this is, I believe, a California death metal band or death thrash band, if you really want to break it down further. And the thing that kind of took me by surprise about this is how similar they are to a band like Vader, and even to a lesser extent, Morbid Angel, to the point where I would call Eternal American Vader, because we haven't had a Vader album in 4 years, almost five. And I feels like this band was kind of trying to be like, okay, this is kind of like a Vader album that never came out or was released. And it's just so energetic, it's thrashy, it's heavy, all your classic death metal tropes, but with a lot of thrash metal energy and attitude behind it. And I can't wait to hear what this band has in store next. So, in terms of the future of death metal from bands that just released stuff this year, I think death metal's in good hands with Eternal. Number 25, speaking of younger bands, we have Suffer with The Grand Canvas of the Aesthete. This is the only album on the list that did not get a review. And I feel ashamed because this is an awesome, straight up death metal album. Like, basically, if you mixed the harmonies and melodies and the vocals of Carcass with the evilness and the riffage of Morbid Angel, with the grooves and the chugs of Suffocation. Awesome mix of influences going on here. The vocals instantly made me think of Jeff Walker. Like I said, the melodies and harmonies harken back to like the necroticism, hard work era of Carcass. But man, a lot of these riffs and these blasts just definitely made me think of Morbid Angel, but the grooves and the chugs, Suffocation, just up the ante on here. And to think this was their first one in 9 years, I need to go back and get some of their older stuff, but holy crap. I hope this band releases something really soon, because holy shit. If you guys haven't checked out Suffer, check them out. If you love Carcass, Morbid Angel, and Suffocation, check them out. Number 24, we have Eternal Storm with A Giant Bound to Fall. This is another one that kind of took me by surprise a little bit. I know I keep saying that a lot, but a lot of these albums truly did, because this is a newer band. And I couldn't believe how catchy and dynamic the songwriting was on here. And plus, having a couple really cool guest spots. I believe you had one from Sven from Aborted and Dan Swano. And of course, you know how much I fucking love Dan Swano. But yeah, this is just beautiful, progressive, melodic death metal that definitely harkens back to, old Opeth, some In Mourning, maybe even a little bit of Enslaved at times, because it does get a little bit more adventurous, if you ask me. And to think, this is on Transcending Obscurity, I believe, is the label this came out on, and it feels kind of so far removed from everything else that's on that label, but it still doesn't take away from how masterful this album was. And for that gives I respect them. That's basically what I'm trying to say. I respect them for being able to stand out on a rather brutal label. Number 23, we have Necrowretch with Swords of Jal. I probably butchered that, but whatever. Yeah, French band that I had not heard of until this new album, and one of the big things that caught me right off the bat with this album was how close it sounds to one of my favorite black and death metal bands of all time, maybe my favorite black and death metal band of all time, Necrophobic, which, spoiler alert again, we're going to talk about them later in this list a couple of times. But yeah, Necrowretch basically take, black metal and death metal, add some melody, and just add a little more, I guess chaos would be a good word, because it does get rather chaotic at times, but it's still pretty fun to hear a young band trying to kind of take the torch from a band like Necrophobic and kind of evolve it. Well, I guess I shouldn't say evolve it, but keep it going. Even though Necrophobic shows no signs of slowing down. But yeah, definitely say, like, if Necrophobic were to stop doing as many albums, you're in good hands with a band like Necrowretch. So they ended up as my number 23. Number 22, we have Wraith with Fueled by Fear. Now, when it came to thrash this year it was kind of quiet for thrash, in my personal opinion. But this is definitely one of the big standouts for thrash, in my opinion, because this is like hybrid of thrash, blackened thrash, speed metal, and a little bit of punk. And of course, a little bit biased considering I saw these guys live and they put on an absolutely fantastic show. And they did play a good chunk of this album live, like Heathen's Touch. That was a big, like, banger in the mosh pits at that show. It was awesome. The whole album, top to bottom, even if it does drag a little bit, it doesn't take away from how furious and gnarly this album really gets when you get down to the nitty gritty. So yeah, Wraith, when it comes to the future of thrash, Wraith is definitely a good band you can look up to as being torchbearers for the future of modern thrash. Number 21, we have Ancients with Beyond the Reach of the Sun. So yeah, Ancients was a band I'd been needing to get into for a long time, considering I heard they sound a lot like Opeth and Mastodon. And I would say, listening to this album, that's pretty much accurate, but I would also throw in Alice in Chains a little bit, because there are some riffs and like vocal moments that made me think Alice in Chains. But like musically, this is just awesome progressive death metal, extreme progressive metal, whatever you want to call it. But prog as a whole this year really came out in a big way, mostly in the underground rather than like some of the more mainstream bands, quote unquote, except for one, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, Ancients, I definitely need to go back and listen to their older material, because this was some really magical stuff right here for me too, considering Opeth and Mastodon, two of my all-time favorite bands, and, well, this band kind of sits in between both and does both very, very well, but still sounding like Ancients, which, 2 thumbs up. Number 20, we have Sentient Horror with In Service of the Dead. Yeah, this one was a bit of a late surprise considering this came out towards the end of October, but still, I absolutely love what this band has been doing. Hell, I was a big fan of their previous album, Rites of Gore. That actually, I think, made my top 5 in 2022. So yeah, this one drops to 20, but that's just because the competition this year was fiercer than it was for them in 2022. But I would argue this is just as good, if not better, than Rites of Gore. Like, I just love the catchiness, and of course, with that HM2 tone, you know I'm going to praise the fuck out of it, considering I'm a slut for that style. And Sentient Horror just keeping the legacies of bands like Entombed and Edge of Sanity in particular going here in the States. Sentient Horror, 4 horns up. Number 19, speaking of debuts, going back to when I was talking about Eternal, next up at number 19 we have Vicious Blade with Relentless Force. I would say in terms of like debut albums, this was probably my favorite one out of the bunch. So this is a thrash band fronted by the frontwoman of Castrator, Clarissa. And holy shit, not only can she do an awesome death growl, she has a nasty, like, blackened thrash vocal delivery. And even when she's not doing it, she's occasionally doing roars, but even she has, like, a little bit of a, a little bit of, like, a punk vibe on one track where she kind of reminded me a little bit of the frontwoman of Sacrilege back in the 80s. I thought that was a pretty cool moment. But yeah, this is just sinister, sleazy thrash from a new band that I look forward to hearing what Clarissa and the boys within are doing, because this was some fun as fuck thrash from, what was the label? Redefining Darkness. Thank God. So, yeah, back to back, we had Redefining Darkness at 20 and at 19. But, yeah, Vicious Blade. Number 18, we have 200 Stab Wounds with Manual Manic Procedures. I almost fucked that up. I had to make sure. But yeah, Ohio boys, just come out of nowhere once again, and this is their first album on a major label on Metal Blade. And holy shit, I will say this is even better than Slave to the Scalpel. And Slave to the Scalpel was pretty fucking great too. But I think because of the extra thrash influence that shows up on here, as well as a little more melody, really helps the heavier moments stand out even more than what you would have gotten on Slave to the Scalpel. And I'm proud to say that we have an Ohio band that's basically now helping to carry the death metal torch even further into the future, but in the more primal, thrashy death metal style. So, yeah, my boys from Cleveland, you guys keep doing what you do because I fucking love it. Number 17, we have Morbid Saint with Swallowed by Hell. In terms of comeback albums, this was a giant one, considering this was their first one in 30 plus years. And it just, again, came out of nowhere and just, holy shit. And we thought, like, the new Sadus was a big comeback, which it was. I would say this one beats Sadus' new album by a little bit. I mean, it's got that little extra element of chaos added to it to really make it sound a little more insane. But yeah, I still need to get my CD copy of this one because Morbid Saint, I will say, in terms of underrated thrash bands, these guys are definitely in that conversation because this album, I think, definitely proves it that, hey, they can come back and they can make something that's almost as good as their debut album, Spectrum of Death, and be like, hey, we can still go here in 2024 and show to these younger thrash kids that, hey, if you want to do thrash, do it right. Pay attention to Swallowed by Hell. Number 16, we have Judas Priest with Invincible Shield. So, yeah, no surprise this one ended up on the list. But again, Judas Priest, been on a tear ever since Firepower came out 6 years ago. And this album, I don't know if it's as good as Firepower, but it's still amazing. And of course, you know, production-wise, I mean, it's Andy Sneap, but still, getting the best sound, that's what I was trying to say, out of modern Judas Priest. And, like, even fucking Halford, even in his early to mid-70s, he is still wailing like an air raid siren, and he still sounds great. And, of course, Glenn, even though he's going through Parkinson's, in the studio, he's still coming up with awesome riffs and great solos. He and Richie Faulkner still working very well together at tandem. Of course, Scott Travis is a fucking beast on the drums. I mean, top to bottom, this whole album, but Heavy is the Crown of Horns. Beautiful song. Absolutely beautiful song. Can't go wrong with it. So yeah, number 16, Judas Priest, Invincible Shield. Alright, so now, I need a drink. So now we are, excuse me, halfway through the list. 15 down, 15 to go. Coming in at number 15, we have Nile with The Underworld Awaits Us All. This was the Nile album I have been waiting for a while. Granted, Vile Nihilistic Rites was a great album. However, I personally felt, and I even said it in the review, that it was I felt a transition album, considering it was the first one without Dallas Toller Wade. It was the first one with Brian Kingsland. Now, 5 years later, we get this album, and you get two other new members. You have Dan from Morbid Angel and, oh God, what the hell is his name? I forget his name, who's from Olkoff. But yeah, you got new players in the mix, adding their own flair on here in terms of bass, guitar, and vocals. And the triple vocal dynamic of, I forget his name, Zach from Olkoff, Brian, and Carl Sanders, just created utter brutality on here. And of course, I would argue this is probably the best Nile album to come since Annihilation of the Wicked, or even Iffy Phallic. This was just awesome Nile. Nothing more, nothing less. Definitely go back to this if you haven't. Number 14, in terms of my favorite black metal, like straight up black metal album of the year, we have Inaphilion with Reaperdon. So this is the side project from 3/4 or 3/5, I should say, of Necrophobic, and this is just straight up black metal with little hints of death metal and like a couple of vocal moments and some riffs. But for the most part, this is just straight up black metal, and I will personally say I think in terms of like traditional black metal, this was the best work of the year. And this is only their second album. I was a really big fan of Moribund, their debut. Now this is on Century Media, and obviously big production upgrade, and it sounds phenomenal. Of course, Sebastian ripping on the guitar, but also delivering some evil vocals. Not only in the screams, but in the growls. Again, I'll say it, I think Sebastian should form a death metal side project and do vocals, because he's got some pretty strong death metal vocals, too. But yeah, in terms of straight up black metal, this was my favorite album of black metal this year. Coming in at number 13, we have Pallbearer, Mind Burns Alive. Definitely in terms of what would be considered the saddest album of 2024 in terms of emotion, lyrics, and even in melody, this is probably the album of the year in terms of sadness. Because, man, when you listen to this album, it's heartbreaking, especially when you dig into the lyrics. Musically, it's Pallbearer. It's just melodic, still heavy, doom metal with just tuneful, soothing vocals that can honestly make a child, like a baby, fall asleep because of how wonderful they're done. But yeah, Pallbearer, I think in terms of who might be the best modern doom metal band, it's probably Pallbearer. Then again, there's another band within Doom that I think might give them a run for the money, and I'll be talking about them much later. But yeah, Pallbearer at my number 13. Number 12, we have Borknagar Fall. I mean, I was eagerly anticipating a new Borknagar album since it'd been 5 years since... I completely forgot the name of the album that came out in 2019, but that was phenomenal too. This one, The Wildlingers in particular, that song was one of my favorites of the year. Then again, the whole album is just beautiful, progressive black metal, Viking, whatever you want to call it, but prog. Just, and again, with this being the second album in a row with ICS Vortex primarily at the vocal helm, along with Lars Nedland. Even though I'd still miss Wintersorg, I'm going to allow it just being ICS and Lars, because these two, when they work together, they have two of the best voices I've heard in modern metal. I mean, especially ICS with his like borderline John Anderson type vocals. Same with Lars Nedland, but yeah, just great riffs. When it gets heavy, but the melodies and the hooks and the vocals, some of the best vocals of the year. Don't think it was the best in terms of vocals. That album is yet to come. But yeah, number 12, we have Borknagar. Coming in at number 11, Necrophobic with In the Twilight Grey. I remembered being super hyped for this album, considering I was a huge fan of Dawn of the Damned. If I recall, that might have been my number 2 in 2020, because it was that fucking good. While this album, I wouldn't say it's better than Dawn of the Damned, I would say it's on par with Dawn of the Damned. And I just love, like, all the different elements going on here. Like, the triplet chugs, especially on, what the hell was the name of that song? I'm gonna have to go back and grab, because I can't remember off the top of my head. What was it? Cast in Stone. If I can get it back in the damn shelf. Cast in Stone. That opening triplet chug with that big riff progression, I think I even said in the review, it sounded like if you took Decapitated and Bathory and mixed it together. I was just like, holy shit! This was just bonkers in my head. I'm just like, Give me more. Give me more. I'm so sorry you had to see that. But anyways, but yeah, this album just barely missed the top 10 for me, but still top to bottom. It's necrophobic, in my opinion, the greatest blackened death metal band of all time. Behemoth doesn't come close. But that's just my opinion. I do love Behemoth, but you get the idea. Alright, so now we are into the top 10. And to me, these are the 10 albums that I think really encapsulated everything great about metal in 2024, for one reason or another. Coming in at number 10, we have Opeth, The Last Will and Testament. This shouldn't be a shock that this album made the list, considering I'm a giant Opeth fanboy, but listen to the album, because this sounds like a great transition into maybe a new era for Opeth. Considering all of the 2010s, it was basically that more prog rock sound. Granted, it got heavier towards the end with Sorceress and especially in Call of Venom. This one, I think it pushes a little bit more on the heavier side than in Call of Venom, but still got a lot of prog rock to it. But I mean, the death metal moments come back. The vocals, like Michael's back to growling again, and he sounds just as great as he did growling back in the 2000s and in the 90s. But not only that, you do get some like death metal moments, like death metal chugs here and there, even if the guitar tone may not be the strongest guitar tone, but it's definitely pushing more towards a heavier style of Opeth. Like, this almost feels like the lost transition album between Watershed and Heritage. But it definitely stands out in their catalog as something really unique and something special. And I can't wait to hear what comes next. Are they going to get back to a little bit of a heavier guitar tone and kind of keep what they've been doing musically on here? And that's with the combination of prog rock, prog metal, and death metal. But just push the guitar tone to be a little more crisper and a little more chunky, but still retaining beautiful melody. Like, this feels like an album that could have been released in the mid-70s and it would have been, like, pioneering. That's kind of how I look at it, but, I mean, especially A Story Never Told. One of the most beautiful songs I've heard in a long time. So yeah, Opeth, my number 10. Number 9, we have Skeletal Remains with Fragments of the Ageless. Back to more old school sounding death metal on this one, and holy shit, this might be my favorite, even though I've not listened to a whole lot of Skeletal Remains, but so far this might be my favorite, because, you know, Chris Monroy's not quite doing the Martin Van Drunen vocals anymore. He's kind of starting to carve out his own style, but it still has a little bit of that Van Drunen element to it, but not quite as prevalent. Musically, this feels like a Morbid Angel album that should have been released back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Like, musically, there's a ton of Morbid Angel on here, but you still also get some, like, Death and Cannibal Corpse, Blood Red Throne, all sorts of old school death metal on this album. Yeah, Skeletal Remains, they just continue to rise to the top, the cream of the crop always rises to the top, and yeah, Skeletal Remains, I definitely, in terms of like pioneering the modern old school death metal movement, and they're still showing that, hey, old school death metal is here to stay. Speaking of old school death metal, coming in at number 8, we have Necrot with Lifeless Birth. This one, you could honestly interchange both Skeletal Remains and Necrot for this list, but Necrot goes up ahead just because, holy shit, like, a lot of these riffs were just super fucking catchy. I think I even said it in the review. If you love Morbid Angel, but you also really love Bolt Thrower, this is fucking monstrous. You know, cut the cord, drill the skull. Ugh. And even the album cover, like, I know Nick from Thralls, whenever I met him, he was wearing the cover as the t-shirt. I need to fucking get that t-shirt too. But yeah, this album, in terms of, like, again, more of the old school death metal vibe, definitely one of the best, for damn sure. but not quite the best, in my opinion. Coming in at number 7, we have another one that came out of nowhere, Laceration with I Erode. So, yeah, this one, I was curious about this one considering, the name, Laceration. Definitely sounds like death metal. And it absolutely is death metal. This is another old school sounding death metal album. Now, some people might be surprised I didn't have Blood Red Throne on the list, and it was a good album. I think I overrated it, though, when it came out, mainly because I was just so ecstatic about hearing new Blood Red Throne. But it's still pretty good, but it didn't make my list. I will personally say I think this album, Laceration I Erode, might be a slightly better Blood Red Throne album than what Blood Red Throne did this year with Nonagon. Because, like, riff-wise and rhythms, it's like Blood Red Throne, Cannibal Corpse, Skeletal Remains. Vocally, though, sounds like a hybrid of Martin Van Drunen and John Tardy. So this almost sounds like if Van Drunen or Tardy fronted Cannibal Corpse or Blood Red Throne, and it fits like a custom-made glove. It was awesome. This is just, I would say in terms of, like, straight-up old-school sounding death metal, to me, personally, this was another one of the best. But still not quite the best. Coming in at number 6, another one that won't be a surprise to anybody. Darkthrone, It Beckons Us All. Yeah, I'm a Darkthrone fanboy, especially of the modern output, and this album is certainly no exception. I mean, I actually think I like this one more than Astral Fortress and Eternal Hails. Like, production-wise, still retains that gritty late 70s, early 80s sound. Musically, I just love how there's more going on, like, not just what they've been doing. Like, of course, you get, like, classic metal, doom metal, speed metal, even little tiny hints of prog rock, mainly on the closer. But also you still get those, like, primal Celtic Frost riffs, especially on, I should have wrote notes for this, but I'm just kind of winging this. But I will say, the Bird People of Nordland, another one of my favorite songs of the year, especially those grooves and those riffs, and even when it gets into the speed metal, it was just magical. Like, of course, Fenris and Nocturno Culto, the diabolical duo, the Gruesome Twosome of Norway, just continue to show that, yeah, we're here to stay, and we keep on chugging along, writing, minimalist, but still very catchy, awesome metal. Not just black metal, metal. Now we're into the top 5. Coming in at number 5, we have Ripped to Shreds, Sanchi. This, in my opinion, in terms of like 100% old school sounding death metal, the best album. Holy shit. Especially the opening track feels like a perfect homage to Entombed Left Hand Path right here, with how it was structured and even in some of the melodies that showed up. But I mean, the thing that really put this album over the edge, in my personal opinion, was the guitars, especially in the leads. Like, there was one track on here where you get one of the best harmonized guitar solos I have heard in a dog's age. Like, oh my god, it was beautiful and tasty, and of course, HM2 tone once again. Andrew, he just continues to push himself. He just continues to push himself songwriting wise and creativity wise, and even production wise. And yeah, I can't wait to hear more. I can't wait to hear more, considering how masterful this one was as well. Coming in at number 4 in terms of the best doom metal album, Crypt Sermon to Stygian Rose. Now, at the same time, you could almost call this classic heavy metal as well, because, yeah, there's a lot of classic metal on here too. But I was a really big fan of their last album that came out in 2019. I think this one's a little bit better than Fading Light of Ruin, or Fading Ruin of Light. I think something along those lines. But here with Stygian Rose, like, of course, top to bottom with everything this album had to offer. Gloom and doom, triumph, catchiness, classic metal moments. Basically, if you were to take Candlemass, Black Sabbath, and to a lesser degree, you could say Judas Priest. If Priest was like a doom band, that's pretty much Crypt Sermon right here, because, it sounds old school. Everything about it is old school, but still done in a modern sense. In terms of the future of doom metal, it's Crypt Sermon and Pallbearer that are really keeping everything going. Hats off to you. Coming in at number 3, we have Jotun, Kinship. This one, I was mind blown with this one. Of course, top to bottom, I would say in terms of, progressive death metal, progressive melodic death metal, this is one of the big masterpieces of the year. And of course, this was the first time I listened to this band, and I heard a ton of buzz about them from their debut album. But still, and as of recording this, I've still yet to listen to the debut. I need to listen to it. But with this, holy crap, the dynamics, the melodies, the riffs, the rhythms, but the vocals, John Aldara, how does he do it? And this was the first time I ever listened to anything from this guy, and I'm thinking, what in the... I was kind of left speechless when I heard his vocals, especially on the song Mistland, which I will say in terms of the best chorus, Mistland, in my opinion, was the best chorus of the year, bar none. It's triumphant, it's epic, it's catchy, and of course John's vocals in all assets, unbelievable. Like, his high cleans don't sound cheesy, they sound beautiful. His low cleans are tuneful and soothing. His screams and growls are up there among some of the best in black metal and death metal, even though this is still, for the most part, progressive melodic death metal. But yeah, again, if you haven't listened to Jotun, basically if you love old Opeth and Borknagar, check them out. But before we get into the top 2, this was difficult, because these next 2 albums, I could have easily done a 1A and 1B with both of these albums, because holy shit, these 2 albums I've listened to a lot, and they were clear-cut my top 2 when putting this list together. As far as which one was going to reign supreme, that was a whole nother conversation to be had. But after much deliberation, my number 2, Blood Incantation, Absolute Elsewhere. This shouldn't be a shock to anybody, considering everybody's been raving about this album in a big way, except for those frickin' moron elitists I talked about in a video a few weeks ago, but I digress from there. 2 20-plus minute songs, and both songs just showcase everything that not only Blood Incantation's all about, but what they were wanting to become. Basically, you take their entire career thus far, this is only their 3rd album, and mix it all into one, and they create cosmic, evil magic. If you were to take Morbid Angel, Time Ghoul, Immolation, and later era Death, and mix it with Tangerine Dream, Pink Floyd, Yes, and Genesis, you basically get this album. Like the riffs, like especially when they're at their heaviest, some of the heaviest riffs of the year, and the triplet chugging, the big breakdowns, even the big tremolo blasts, just and then the Message Tablet 2, channeling Pink Floyd, and it was wonderful. Even some classic metal pops up on here on occasion. And this album's so good that even Mike Portnoy said this was his album of the year. So if that doesn't tell you something, I don't know what will. But Blood Incantation, in terms of death metal's future, progressive death metal's future even, we're in good hands. But that leaves us with only one number one. This one, for those who know me, should probably know what my number one is. But for those who aren't aware, be prepared. Number one, Ulcerate Cutting the Throat of God. This one came out back in the summer. I was eagerly anticipating it once I was getting more into Ulcerate. And whenever I first heard the opening melody on the opening track, I was like, oh my god. This is dark. It is dense, dissonant as all hell. But more than that, somehow they managed to make all this catchy. I mean, top to bottom, I would argue, in terms of what would be the darkest death metal album I have heard in a while, this probably would be that album. You know, you're mixing technical death metal, black metal, and post metal, mash it all together. Basically, if you were, and I keep using these comparisons, if you were to blend later Gorguts, Immolation, Deathspell Omega, and Neurosis, you get Ulcerate. It's like, their influences are clear, but they still sound like themselves. To Flow Through Ashen Hearts, Transfiguration in and Out of Worlds, Undying as an Apparition, the title track, top to bottom, everything. Masterpiece of tech death, of dissonant death, and of darkness. A round of applause for Ulcerate. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the year-end list of 2024. What an amazing year this was. I mean, death metal and prog reigned supreme, to no surprise. Granted, thrash was a bit quiet. Black metal, in my opinion, was a little bit quiet, but still plenty of great stuff in between. Classic metal, even a couple power metal albums I thought were really solid as well. And of course, you know, old school bands still going strong. A couple of them, maybe not as much. Newer bands coming up out of the woodwork this year with first releases, pretty much hitting it right out of the park on their first go. And of course, the future still looks bright for this music. 2025 is already looking to be massive, and I can't wait for that. But we're going to save that conversation for New Year's Eve. But anyways, of course, this list is all albums, just in my opinion. What did you guys think? Let me know, what was your favorite album of 2024? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. We still got plenty of videos left before 2024 comes to a close. But until then, thank you for watching. Keep your horns high and your dreams wet.